Duck's Journey by NCO Pictures. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Gordon's run-in with the supernatural. Despite this, he was still traumatized, his perception of what he saw, and the reality of it still haunting him. Because of this, the other engines had to do his work as well as their own. No one complained for a while, but eventually it began to get tiresome. One particular morning, Duck tried speaking to Gordon, and was as opinionated as ever. "Gordon, I know that every engine goes through strange things differently, but can you please recover a little faster?" he asked. Gordon didn't say anything. He just stared at his buffers somberly. "You must at least think of your passengers and the rest of us. We engines have to put aside our troubles sometimes. It's simply the Great Western. To hell with your way!" shouted Thomas angrily. When Thomas heard about Gordon's encounter, he took it very seriously. "Gordon will be back to work when he is ready." "What's this?" demanded Duck. "Had you become a therapist now, Thomas?" "It's called sticking up for your friends, mongrel. It's punnier. And what I say is true. We all have important jobs as engines. Where I come from, we got over any inconvenience we had." Thomas growled. "I bet if you saw a ghost, you'd be just as scared, and I won't be there to coax you if you do." "Fine by me," stated Duck with a scowl. However, once he saw a small tear run down Gordon's eye, Duck realized he was overdoing it, and left to return to his work. "I'm so sorry, Gordon," said Thomas feebly. "It's okay, Thomas." That night, Duck had to take a goods train to Crovan's Gate. The wind blew gently against the pannier tank as he coasted along the track. The stars danced all around, which lit up the island and casted fierce, dark shadows over anything in its gaze. He was still thinking about Gordon and Thomas, and just how seriously the Blue E2 was taking the situation. Still, he remained vigilant with his stance. He thought Gordon was being overdramatic, and he thought Thomas was building up to some elaborate joke. Soon he arrived at his destination. The little engines of the Skarloey Railway were already asleep, and there was only a skeleton crew at the station to help unload Duck's cargo. As he idled at the platform, Duck noticed something strange happening. Every sound that he heard, be it the chatter of the workman and his crew, or the distant sound of cars and lorries on the road, began to get quieter and quieter. "Huh? What's happening? Am I going deaf?" he asked himself. But he could still hear his own voice just fine. After a few moments, the entire world around Duck went silent. He could hear nothing but himself. Suddenly he heard a voice. "So, you finally showed up," said the voice. It was old and raspy, as if someone inhaled an entire pile of hot ash. "Who's there?" Duck called out. Just then, he saw the tracks were beginning to change, right underneath him and beyond. Then everything else started changing. The streets, the buildings, the people, even the sleeping narrow-gauge engine suddenly vanished, replaced either by nature or very old buildings that were not there in the first place. The tracks, which were once 3 rows of steel rails, were suddenly turned into one singular row of iron fish-belly rails. "I heard everything about you, Montague," the voice stated in a strict tone. It's Duck," he shouted, quivering as he watched himself be transported back in time. "Pah! A silly name. How fitting for you." Finally, the owner of the voice made herself known. There was a creak and a groan as a loud, slow chuffing sound could be heard, and finally Duck saw it. It was a very, very, very old engine. It looked almost like Stephen, or even far older than Stephen. She was covered from wheel to funnel in rust and corrosion, her boiler having a massive gash in it, with only a faint letter V on her side to indicate that she had a name. Her cylinders were vertical, cogs were underneath her frame, and a large barrel sat in her tender. Her face sent chills down Duck's boiler. Her eyes were sunken in with age, ashes and soot covering her face as she gave a terrifying scowl. Who are you? Duck asked, now scared out of his mind as he took everything in. You will address me as ma'am. I was once like you, the engine stated, partially ignoring his question. Full of myself, thinking my way was the best. My superiority in all its majesty. Rude. I eventually saw sense, unlike you, she stated, her eyes piercing through Duck's like bullets. But I've never been rude to anyone. The big blue engine would say otherwise, as would his friends. Oh, yes, I know what happened. I've seen everything. And you know what? Your type of engine disgusts me and your old railway. I didn't help replace those bloody horses just to see inconsiderate little things like you. For shame, you prized idiot. Duck frowned. Now listen here, you Spectre. The Great Western Way— That's enough! She yelled. Her voice echoed everywhere, and Duck instantly closed his mouth, choosing his next words carefully. I simply want this railway to run properly. I want Gordon to see sense. But now I know that his current state is warranted. Duck started to feel worse. He wished he could have taken it all back. If you want something like that, the least you can do, Montague, is to leave your attitude at your shed. I learned that over 200 years ago. You can't get what you want by annoying others for it. No one will ever do things your way, and you will accept that. I learned that, but it took forever, and by the time I did, I had 1 year left of service before the railroad was dismantled. The engine stared down at the tracks, a somber look in her eye. It quickly disappeared. You have springs like me, and you have suspension like me. What does that mean? It means you aren't entirely rigid, so act like it. Help your friends, but also know your way isn't the only way. Otherwise, you will be the one needing help. A very, very faint smile formed on the engine's face. I will. You're right. That was so wrong of me to talk to Gordon like that. I won't let you down, ma'am. Don't worry about me. Worry about yourself, boy, she said sternly. And then, ever so slowly, the area of Crowman's Gate began to return back to how it looked in the present day. But wait! What's your name? I'd like to know! Duck called out as the engine began to back up. The engine smiled. Vera, and tell Stephen I said hello. And with that, the engine disappeared, and time moved forward again. Duck was still in deep thought. Duck? Duck? Come on, old boy, snap out of it, his driver yelled from his cab. Huh? Oh, sorry about that, he replied. You were miles away. Haha, that isn't very Great Western of you, now is it? Laughed the fireman. Yeah, Duck sighed as he began to depart to Vickerstown. Driver, when we get back to Teignmouth, can you make sure I'm parked next to Gordon? Sure, Duck. What for? I have a lot of apologizing to do, he said with a guilty frown. His crew didn't quite know why, but they could tell by Duck's voice that he was sincere. Duck would make sure to do just that the next time he saw Gordon. He would even let his grudge with Thomas slip away into the past, if it meant rebuilding his attitude. And besides, he knew that somewhere, peeking through the veil of time, old Vera would be making sure of that.